Okay guys, more on mixing, and this time it's metal time. I just mixed this metal track the other day, about 5 hours I spent on it. It's a kind of first draft mix. Yeah, I know this channel is called Dance Tech, but there's so much of the channel is to do with general engineering and stuff. If you look on the channel, there's lots of tutorials about compression and EQ and mixing and audio and all sorts of things. You know, it's not just about dance music. Anyway, I went to that Cambridge Multitrack website. The link is in the description below, where they hand out multitracks, which you can mix. I didn't have anything to do. This is about 3 days ago. And I looked at what was new, because they upload new tracks for people to mix, and I just chose this one. And anyway, I'll play it. Now, it's 6 minutes long, so I'll put a link in the description. You know, if you don't want to hear it all the way through, the end of this is about 6.5 minutes from the start, right? And then I'll talk about what I did. And you can go over to the link and listen to the other mixes people have done and see what people are doing and all the rest of it. Have a go yourself if you want. Anyway, here it is. It's got no singing. It's it's strange. It's a metal thing, but it's got strings and synths in it. It's sort of slightly experimental. Okay, anyway, here you go. It's not fully mixed. I need to give this another session at decent volume on speakers. So, but I've gone for a more low-end grind, less mid. But anyway, have a listen. Here we go. Yeah, I said first mix. That took about 5 hours. About an hour of that was arranging things in terms of getting the multi-track sorted out and finding out what I needed, what I discarded. There's quite a few drum channels. I didn't use any of those. I'm only using one of the bass channels. There's a DI and an amp channel. I'm not using the DI. So yeah. Okay, so what did I do? Well, look, my approach to this was, because there were 6 channels of guitars. Okay, there were 3 DI'd guitars there, and they're clean. I've got an amplitude amp on each of these, and it's the same on all of them. It's this amp. I don't know why I just ended up using this one. It could have been something different, but I went for this. It's not massively scooped, okay, but the bass is not. The bass is rolled off a bit. The mids are rolled off. They're not totally off, and the treble isn't massively high. Okay, they've all got roughly that. Now these 3 guitars are DI'd. Then there's 3 amped guitars that came off the amps, mic'd. Okay, and they've got no. I'm not using any amp rigs on these at all. Okay, so look, the way it works is that what I wanted to go for is I've mixed my guitars less mid-range, and by the way, the Mac's fanning up. I've got the window open. It's incredibly warm today. You know, like, there's no way I can do this with the window closed. So there's going to be lots of traffic noise and things coming in. The Mac will stop fanning up in a bit. It's just because it just played through all that stuff. So the approach I went for was I wanted more bass in my guitars, okay, rather than relying entirely on the bass for the bass. Now, as I said, I've got the link below in the description. You can go over there and listen to the different mixes people have done. You can download the multi-track. You can try mixing it yourself. I didn't listen to everybody's mix. I listened to a few of them, and the general thing was to go for the guitars more in their natural tone as recorded, as far as I can hear it, with a lot more body and a lot more wood mid, lower, and mid-tone and lower mid-tone to the guitars. I've gone for something different. I wanted to get more grind out of my guitars. So what I did is this. These 3 guitars are as is. No EQ, no compression, nothing on their channels. Now the 2 main guitars are just panned hard left, hard left, hard right. And one of them's got a sample delay on, 40 milliseconds of sample delay. This is a age-old technique. You pan a guitar hard left, hard right, and it works better if it's double tracked rather than just a copy of the same guitar. But you pan it hard left, hard right, and you put a delay on one side. That has the effect of spreading it out across the speakers, because there's a slight delay between the left and right side. Okay, and then the 3rd guitar is right down the middle, but it's a lot lower because I didn't want to clutter up the middle too much. Okay, now those 3 guitars are all going out on their own bus to the group bus here, Gits 1. And let me take them out of solo over here. So they sound like this all together on this group bus. They're heavily gated. Okay, it's not a huge amount of hold and release. I wanted them to shut down, like riff, riff, shut, riff, shut, rap and shut, rap and shut. There's still a little bit of tweaking I need to do because they're opening up. These or the other group of guitars, which I'll show you in a minute, are opening up in a couple of places where they shouldn't, or I don't want them to. But I've gated them quite strictly. All right. Let's hear those from the top when the riff comes in. Come on. Here we go. Now you can hear they haven't got a lot of bottom end at all. There's really no bottom end grind to those guitars at all. It's all in the upper mids and treble, but not too harsh treble. Now I'm gating them quite strictly. Then they're going into a multi-compressor, and I'm just basically compressing them in a scoop, right? So they got some treble, they got some little, they're not massively bottom endy, but there's more happening than this. But I'm compressing the lower mids and the mids the most, right? Just scooping them with that. Then they're going into an SSL 4000 channel strip and brown knob mode, slightly less peaky EQ. Really, I'm using this for the channel compressor to get the classic SSL channel compressor on this, and I've got it set in fast attack. So they're getting some hard SSL channel compression here. Okay, the gate's working. They've got gate on the channel like a regular gate, but the gate is also working here, but it's not turned right up. So it's just, this is just helping to create an envelope with the compressor on these guitars, and the gate itself before that is just shutting everything down. But before the gate totally shuts, this is applying a little bit of smoothing envelope, right, on the shutdown. Bass end, I ended up rolling off the bass completely here. I mean, well, you know, at 75 hertz, really turned down in shelf mode. Now I'm adding a smidge, just a tiny smidge of 700 hertz here, which is a sort of lowish, woody mid-tone. And then I'm giving some treble at 3K, quite a bit of boost at 7 dB of boost. Fairly wide Q, not super tight. Okay, so I'm giving us some treble boost at 3K, which is not really fizzy upper metallic treble. It's more presence treble area. And then some 4.5K in peak mode, so it's not shelving right up to the top. It's 5 dB, just over 5 dB of boost. So treble boosting it a little, right? But it's really all about getting this channel compression going on it. And giving the channel a little bit of boost to drive the channel a little bit as well. Okay, after that, it goes into a sunset sound, an IK Multimedia sunset sound. And I'm using the ambient studio space. Okay, in position 1. Now this is just giving me left-right ambience really on the guitars. That's all it's doing. Okay, I've got the full width on. I'm rolling off the bottom a bit. A little bit of extra treble. Decay is set at normal decay. But look, the wet control, it's not up much. So I'm blending in a little bit of this ambience. It slightly lowers the volume a bit actually, but it's just giving this little bit of slapback ambience left and right, this little bit of space sound on it. Could you hear that? Right, okay. A little bit of that. I'm really into that sunset sound. And that's it. Okay, so these guitars haven't got a lot of bottom end, right? You can hear that. But they're not fat. They're not fat and really chunking. Okay, that's my guitars. Well, let's call that the presence for the guitars, right? Okay, but then the 3 DI'd guitars, there's something completely different going on here. Now, 2 of them are just doing the same technique. Now, these have all got an amplitude on, as I showed you, with a slightly scooped sound, but without massive bass boost. And on these 2, they're panned hard left, hard right, and I'm doing the same sample delay, 40 milliseconds of sample delay to make one side delay to the other to give that extra spread. Now that's just given me, if I just solo just these 2, they're going, all those 3 DI guitars are going to that bus. If I just solo these 2, they're just doing a pan hard left with a slight delay between the left and right side. Here it comes. Now on the actual group bus where they arrive, they're being gated. Okay, they've got a little bit more hold and release than the other guitars. You know, this is not fully set yet. I may tweak this if I decide to do any more on it. But that's just, can you hear the bass? They're not trebly. That's all low, mid, boxy tone, right? Not too honky. So there's a lot of wood in there. Let's say there's a lot of woody tone in that. But the main thing that's happening then is there's this 3rd DI'd guitar. Now this is also being stereo pan, but I'm doing it with a different technique because there's only one channel. These 2 are 2 separate channels. So I've panned one left, one right, and there's just one side is delayed. But this is a single channel, but it's panned hard to the left. But then I'm sending out a pre-fade send out. So a copy of this guitar is going out to this auxiliary return. And it's coming into this auxiliary return where there's a sample delay, delaying it at 40 milliseconds. And that's panned hard right. Okay, so these two guitars, there's the left, there's the right. So they're doing the same thing. Panned hard left, hard right, one side being stereo delayed. But, and it's got the same amp sim on as the other two guitars in this group. But I'm pitch shifting it down a whole octave. And then it's going into a Dynamo. This is a TK, an IK multimeter. It's like a very Mu clone, where I'm giving it some fairly tight compression. Okay, and I'm doing all that, the pitch shifting and the Dynamo before it gets into the amplitude. Then it's in the amplitude the same, but I'm scooping the mids out a bit more. Bass is the same, treble's the same as the others. Okay, might even have a bit more gain this. Now look, this guitar, we'll have to mute these two to hear it, and solo the group bass. Okay, so there's the left, there's the right, it's detuned, then going into a compressor, then going to an amp sim, and this is the left side, panned hard left, the send is sending out to here, this is the right side, panned hard right, delayed, and it's got a whole octave detuned. So that's providing this very low octave detuned guitar. Okay, and the three together, then you blend in the two regular ones, which are not trebly, they're more lower mid grind, right? Those two blended in with the deep detuned, octave detuned one gives me this. Here it comes. Okay, now when all those guitars then arrive at the channel, they're going through the gate, they're going through another SSL clone. Again, it's mainly to get the channel compressor. Okay, which is a lovely tight, the SSL channel compressor, beautiful tight thing. But I'm giving them a little bit of 500 hertz boost here to get more rounded, low wood tone. Okay, I'm using the gate again to shape the envelope, so it starts to just, it's coming down a little bit in level before the gate totally shuts. Slightly dip in the low end here. But the main thing is I'm giving it this 500 hertz, little bit of boost here, 4 dB of boost. Not, it's slightly tight. Then a bit of 2.3K, quite a bit, 7.6 dB of boost, quite wide. So I'm boosting the general treble presence area, not the super fizzy upper treble. A little bit of that is being boosted here, 8 dB of boost, but in peak, so it's not shelving all the way to the top with that boost. This is giving me my top end presence and a little bit of fizz and harmonic fizz at the top. But the main thing is it's about that deep tone because of the octave guitar in there. Okay, after it's gone through the that channel EQ, then I'm actually adding this drive, but it's the drive's turned completely down, but this is making a difference. Can you hear it's bringing in more, even though it's set to 2.5K. Yeah, it's having an effect of rolling off the upper frequencies because the tone's set to 2.5K. So you see that blue line is rolling off there. Then it's going into this Strawma S73. Now you won't have this. I love this little compressor, but I'm not using much of it. Just a little. Which is in punch mode. It's not 100% wet. There's a tiny bit of dry in with it, but all this is just subtle. This is just slightly tightening it, maybe, let's say. And then finally, the most important thing is it goes into this graphic then, and when this is out, it's a totally different sound. Right, this is the Logic graphic, the vintage graphic. It's a clone of an API graphic, right? This graphics are so incredibly useful on guitars and basses. Okay, I love to split my guitars into different frequency areas and then graphic. It's just, you can carve out what you don't want. So I'm carving out the 1K here, giving it this boost so it kind of peaks up that treble grind, but there's this cut here, 250. Okay, and remember on the British channel I'm giving it a 500 Hertz bit of boost to get some wood, but this is dipping out those lower muddier mids, sort of just where they start coming into bass territory, and then some bottom end push at 125 Hertz and dipping down to 63, but just cutting out that mud there and the mids. You can hear the definition that gives it. Now that's my grinding bass guitars. They're all bass ended with that octave in. It's giving this bottom end, and if you listen, there's actually a lot of bass tone in there. Especially with that octave guitar in there. So then you blend it with the other guitars which don't have the bass end in. And this gives it this real bottom end grind that I want, with enough bite in the treble area that it's got that grinding treble, but it ain't overloadedly treble, right? So that way I didn't need much bass. Now there's the bass, right? And the bass line, if you listen, I'm reamping it actually, right? So it goes into a gate, fairly tight gating. Look, 40 milliseconds hold and only 23 milliseconds release. It's tight, that gate. It's, you know, quick, shutting it down. Then it goes into a bass amp. Which is tightening the crap out of it by scooping it a lot. Right? There's enough treble in there you can hear what's happening with the strings, but it's all down the bottom end otherwise. Then it goes into a channel EQ where I'm doing this scoop again, taking out more of that low mids, where it transitions into bass, and a bit of a bump in the bass there, carving out all the crap at the bottom with this very steep low cut. And then it goes into a compressor. I'm just giving it some compression, not mega, but the point is I don't need much of it, because the bass guitars with that detuned octave guitar is giving it so much bass end in the guitar riff with that octave, that deep low octave, which is way lower than anything you could get from a detuned guitar. Okay, so the bass is just adding that bottom end rumble, really, without being muddy, and that's that. So then the bass end rumble with the octave detuned guitar, more rounded, and then the treble guitars all together. Yeah, I've still got some extra work to do on the gating. It's just here and there, it's cutting through. In fact, what I might do is put all of those group buses through their own group bus and just gate them, so they've all got the same gate envelope. I don't know. Anyway, that's my guitars. Okay, so it's not 100% final mix, but there. Now the drums, all I'm using is a little bit of the original kick, and a little bit of the original snare, a little bit of the overheads, and the hi-hat. That's it. Now the drum recording wasn't terrible, okay, but I wanted some real definition from the kick, and I wanted the snare to really come through. I didn't want to do a more hard but sort of more buried snare. I've actually put quite a bit of slapback and things on the snare. Okay, so with the kick, I used an all DAW's got this. I'm using Logic, but every DAW can do this. It can analyse the transients of a drum track and extract the MIDI notes. Now it just happens this drummer's timing was incredibly good. So I extracted the timing of the kick, which gave me the kick drum notes, and then I had them play through Modo drum, and I went with the Djent. I spent quite a bit of time on this, going through the different drums, to be honest. That probably took well over an hour. I ended up using, you won't hear this because it's turned off now, the Djent Gentleman kick, right? Fully detuned on both heads, heavily dampened front head, which is really low, back head at full volume of the beta head, but quite heavily damped. I'm using the sharp rim, okay, which gives a little bit more click, a little bit more bite, a little bit more attack. And in terms of the play style with this particular Modo drum, you can choose the different types of beaters. I've gone for a wooden beater. Okay, still giving me some really bass end, less low mid, more bass, not more, but less low mid and more click. Okay, and that's that. And then for the snare, well, it's a different drum kit, so I won't. Let's look at that differently. But that's my kick. Now, since then, I've bounced it down. Okay, because having this new version of Modo drum seems to be a bit CPU hungry, to be honest. Mind you, this isn't a really new Mac. So I bounced it down with no effects or anything on it, just with the level, and then the exact same processors are on the audio version, so it's identical. Okay, so the kick, I've started off with a Pultec, doing a push pull. Okay, this is the Logic Pultec clone, UQP1A. I'm doing the low attenuation and low boost, but not too much low boost. I don't want to overload that bottom end. Down at 60 Hz. I started at 30, but it was too low. So I went up to 60 Hz. So that's giving me that very, very tight, very low 60 Hz bass, but very tight if you use this attenuation and boost at the same time. But I'm not overly boosting it, so it's not really getting out of control, right? But that's giving me a lot of really low bass end. At 3K, at fairly tight bandwidth, I'm boosting the crap out of it to get a lot of click. But above that, at 5K, I'm doing full attenuation, so the top end's totally shelved off, right? I'm actually using the mid section here, and I'm at 200 Hz. I'm doing a full dip to even further scoop out the very low mids just above the bass. Okay, and then at 4K, I've already got this 3K boost, but higher up at 4K, I'm doing a high boost as well. Give it even more click. Okay, that's giving me the bone crushing bass end with a very, 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 very scooped low mids where it transitions into bass. Then it goes into an 1176 clone. This is an IK multimedia one. All buttons in, so I'm giving it a lot of compression, right? Okay. Then it's going into a sunset sound again. I really love this. And I'm using this room again, right, which I used on the one set of the guitars over here, and it's just giving me ambient bounce. It's giving me ambient room slap back, almost very subtle. Yeah, I've rolled the decay off a bit, so it's not the full decay of the room. Giving it a slight treble boost, slightly rolling off the bottom end at 100 Hz coming in, right. But the wet isn't up too much, but listen to it with and without it. Yeah, it's just giving it this sort of ambience, right, which is emphasizing the very, very, it's emphasizing the click a bit, but it's also emphasizing the really low wooden tone. There's some wooden overtones in that kick. You're just being brought out by that. And then it's going into this. This is a T-Rex. It's their own. It's not a clone of something. It's their own multi-band limiter, and I'm just limiting it. Just giving it a bit of limiting there, just to tame it slightly. Then it's going into this channel EQ, and actually I end up using a stock Logic preset, slightly tweaked, called Clean Up Kick. When essentially it's just carving out above 1K, carving out here at just below 200 Hertz, and big carve out in the middle, centered at 500. Then click emphasis here, bottom end emphasis there, right? Then it goes into a brick wall limiter where I'm just pegging the crap out of it, right? Because I want it loud enough that you really get that bottom end, real bottom end, bud tight, but I don't want it overloaded. And there's my kick. Now I might tweak this further if I do any more work on this, but the click in isolation is more than you might want it, but once you get it in the mix, you see, the thing about mixing is sounds don't have to sound in isolation, don't necessarily sound natural. It's how they sit when you're blending them in with everything else that matters, right? And there's my kick. Now that's the kick, the bass, and the guitars. And what I've done is, it was pretty tight. Pretty tight. I'll look at the snare in a sec. But what I've done is, Logic has this feature called Groove Master. So I've made the kick the Groove Master, and I've locked the guitars and the bass. That's all. Just the guitars and the bass have been locked to the kick. Now that has the effect, if you just zoom in a little bit more vertically, of it puts flex onto the guitars and bass, and just fractionally, because it was pretty tight playing anyway, just fractionally drags them to tighten to the kick. That's just giving it that extra tightness without taking away it doesn't sound quantized, right? Because the drummer was incredibly on the money with the kick. I'm amazed. Okay, right. So that helped with the tightness. Now, the snare. Where are we? The snare. Yeah, again, I wanted. It was a bad snare recording. But I wanted something much more cracking that would cut through. Okay, so what I went for was where is it? Here's the snare. Again, I ended up using the Modo drum. And which snare did I end up with actually? The Gigent snare again. I used the sharp shell edge. Okay, makes it a little bit more trebly. Dampen the top head a fair bit. It's tuned at this -10. A lot of tension on the wire, not too much volume on the bottom head. I haven't done a huge amount to it, but on the playstyle thing I'm using a little bit extra tip volume because you can adjust how much you hear the stick, and I'm having the snare played more towards the edge of the rim rather than in the center. Okay, that gets varied with different hits, but it's not always in the center, it's more over to the edge, the snare hits, right? That's it. Okay, now that's been bounced down as well, and there's no EQ, nothing on it, nothing, right? It's just going through a Space Designer, which has got this 0.9 of a second studio room snare, which is giving it this ambient come on, I want to hear the snare, come on. Now there's still reverb on there because that's not all that's happening with the snare, but that's giving it that bigger reverb on the sample of the snare. Now I'm blending that in with a little bit of this is the top mic on the original snare, and I'm just gating it. That's all I'm doing because there's a lot of other noise from drums. And you can hear it's quite, it hasn't got a lot of crack to it, right? It's quite rounded. So a little bit of that top mic snare and a little tiny bit of the bottom mic snare. Both gated quite strictly. But they're providing the body, and then the sample is giving me that more of a crack. But I still didn't think it was enough, so I ended up bringing in this snare layer as well, and this is a sample, because I did the same thing as with the kick. I extracted the timing of the snare, right, to get the MIDI notes. This is a quick sampler, and into it I've loaded one of my own custom samples. It's a brass Rogers snare, which I've EQ'd like this. Lots of treble boost, right? And the scoop out there, whatever that is, 350 hertz, right? That's then going into a space designer itself with, again, the same slapback, and then into a compressor where I'm compressing it, not massively, but you know. Now that snare has this sound. Remember, I'm going to show you the bus that all these layers of the snare are going to in a minute. Yeah, listen to that. Now that's giving me that real upper mid-range crack that was missing. And it's going through that space designer, which gives it that slapback. Now those snares all blended together are going to their own group bus, and they sound all together like this. You don't hear so much of that custom sample now, the one that's going through that slapback. I could raise it more, whatever I want, but where is it? Up here. Okay, that one. Well, it's soloed over there now, but that one that was more that cracking custom snare, they're all going to it now. On the group bus for the snare, they're going into the Logic 1073 clone, where I'm low cutting at 50 hertz just to make sure, you know, get any bottom end crap out of it. I'll give them a bit of body at 220 hertz. That's like low mid. 5 dB of boost. I'm giving them some 4.8, 5 dB of boost at 4.8, which is quite high in a treble, and quite a bit, 6.5 dB of 12K shelf. Okay, then it's going into an 1176 clone. I'm not doing all buttons in here. It's 8:1 ratio. Fair bit of compression though, right? Then again, it's going into this Sunset Sound Studio Reverb. But I'm using one of the chambers. Fair bit of it blended in, but the decay rolled right back to 44%. All right, that's giving me bit of chamber. Then it's going into more. Then it's going to the SAR 1R. So I love this cheap little reverb. And all I'm using this for is for 100 and nearly 100 milliseconds of pre-delay. The wet mix is quite a bit, 20% actually, because there's a lot going on. So if it was too subtle, I wouldn't hear it. That's giving me a lot of that extra bit of slap back on the snare. Come on. Yeah, okay. So that's the snare sound I went for. It's actually quite reverby. I didn't want it too dry and up front, because it's to do with the fact this track's it's slightly sort of experimental, classical with the strings. I wanted to go for something like bigger with the snare. I wanted it to really crack, but also have a bit of space. Okay. And then all I'm using otherwise from the kit is the hi-hats. Using a bit of hi-hat. Let's go back to the start. I'm using a bit of hi-hat. Okay, and that's like massively cut at the, mid-range all the way down cut, just the top end. You can hear other drums in there. Okay, so that's giving me just the hi-hat. And the overheads. Little tiny bit of overheads there. Which is really just about getting the cymbals. And again, I've really rolled off from the mids down the bottom end. That can be adjusted, but... And that's being really heavily compressed with an 1176 clone, all buttons in. Look at the input level there. I'm really... So it's almost like this is doing parallel compression on this very, very treble, or rather mid and bass and low end cut version of the stereo kit. Right? So it's really about the cymbals, and that's all I'm using. I'm not using any of the other drum channels. There were 4 room mics. I'm not using any of those. I'm using the toms. These are the toms here. Okay. Now with the toms, I prefer it when there's not much tom work. Rather than trying to use gates, I prefer to go along and just chop out the toms. So that's what I did. I just went along and chopped them out. Yeah, so, you know, they come in and then they stop, and I just did a fade out on each little region. Right, there they are. Now they're all going to their own group bus. They're over here, look, the toms. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, they're just panned and balanced for level, and they're going to their own group bus over here. And they're going into this really drastic EQ. We're doing a massive carve out of the low mids and the mids, and then they boost like buggery here. They really boost at this presence frequency between 1 and coming up to 2K, and a lot of top end to give them. I want that real bite of the skins being hit. That blap 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 of the skins. The bass, because this is all being cut, and that's being cut below, it's emphasising this area of the bottom end, but I'm not boosting it because I want it overloaded. Now it's going into, then it's going into an LA2A clone, giving it some hammer down, and then finally into Space Designer, where it's getting some, again, 0.8 of a second slap back room to give it that slap back to lift the tom licks out. You know what I mean? So what I get is that massive thud with the skin sound at the top, which is what I wanted, that real deep, bloody great blob, blah, 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 you know? I wanted them to really have Weller, you know? Yeah, blah, 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 right? Thundering, but not muddy. Hence, lots of top end, right? Well, that's it really, isn't it? Apart from the synths and violins. So you got double basses, cellos, violas and strings. Now the violins, and only the violins, are going to their own bus, where I'm really taking out the bottom end, giving a hell of a lot of treble shelf boost. They're then going into an LA2A where they're being squished a bit. But the main thing is then I'm sending out, this is only the violins, the top end of the strings, not the cellos, not the violas, right? Where are the... Yeah. And they're going out to this massive reverb, huge verb. That's like a 7-second verb. Now, only the violins are getting that big, that treble boost, mids and low cut, and going into that big reverb. And the reverb itself, if I remember right, did I EQ the output? Yeah, I've even shelved off the bottom of that and boosted the treble on the... I just... If you've got a load of strings, as long as they're all playing the same thing, layers, like pitched layers, different octaves, if you give the top end, the violins, a lot of reverb, it has the effect of making it sound like the other strings have got it, but you don't have to send the other strings to the reverb so they don't get muddy. It's just a psychoacoustic effect. As long as they're all playing the same thing and they're playing different octaves. You know, the double bass is playing right down the bottom, the cello's playing the low mids, the viola's playing the mids, and the strings up the top. If you just reverb the strings at the top end, it just has the effect of making it sound like the strings have got reverb on. Now the rest of the strings, apart from the double basses, they're not having anything done. They're really low. They're just slightly panned and they're going to the final stereo out. But the violas and cellos are going to this group bus, and all they've got on is some tube delay actually, which is being driven a bit. Yeah, it's not a really big delay time. Okay, but it's just making them a little ambient sort of thing. But they're getting a bit of drive on that, okay? And that's my strings, so they're really low actually. I didn't put them up very high. There are some synths that come in here and there, and they're all going to their own group bus there, where they're getting the bottom end knocked out of them, a bit of treble emphasis, and they're going into the sunset sound as well, where I'm using some chamber. All wet, all wet. We need to find those synths. Where are they? Synths. Come on, here we go. Yeah, and this sunset sound. This is a convolution of one of their actual chambers there. You can actually, how do you do it? I've forgotten now. Yeah, you can look around the chamber and you can see it's long. It's a long chamber. The mics are at the other end. Possibly it gets wider at one end. Anyway, I'm using all wet, no dry at all. Yeah, just making those sound. It's a natural reverb, but it's quite ghostly. But they're not mixed up very high, right? And before it goes into that, I'm knocking out the bottom end so it doesn't get muddy. That's it, really. That's pretty much everything I did. And then just listen and balance, listen, balance, listen, balance. Yeah. Oh, I seem to be using a little bit of the actual real kick here. Should that be up? Or am I muting that in actual fact? Hang on. Yeah, I am. Am I using that? Yeah, a little bit of the real kick. So there. Is that going to the group bus? No, that's going to the stereo out. Oh, is that on this? Well, actually, I hadn't noticed. I don't really want that in. Right, let's have a listen. Now, I showed you the tightening thing already, that I made the kick drum. I mean, the drummer's kick is unbelievably tight. I mean, the timing. But I just didn't care for the tone. I wanted to get a more. I wanted to be able to get an extremely defined bass end from the kick. Hence, I used a sample with no real kick blended in. But with the snare, I used some real snare blended. But I used samples, 2 layered samples and 2 mics from the actual snare recording blended together to get me that more cracking snare that I wanted, right? But I used that technique of locking the guitars to the kick as the groove master. That just tightened it up. It's subtle, very subtle, but a little bit. Just a subtle tightening. Not too much bass because of that grinding bottom end guitar. Detuned an octave. And then finally, just a couple of extras like for the intro here. I decided to put this intro guitar which just does this opening riff and then stops, and after that it never comes back in. So I put it through a telephone EQ. Right, it's a bit Stone Temple Pilots, do you know what I mean? But what I did is at the end I chopped off the final lick and put a fade out on it, then switched that to a tape stop fade out, which makes it sound like it's doing a dive bomb at the end on the whammy. Right? But when you hear that with the other guitars coming with their first lick with the drums, you really hear that dive down and it sort of goes yow like that. I like it like this. You can hear the bass end in there, see, because the bass is low. I don't need that much bass because of that group bus guitar group here with that octave detuned. That's providing me with so much bottom end to the guitar that the bass only needs to be subtle. Just the bass is pegging the bottom end. Alright. Now finally, I have got on the master output this T-Rax 1. Now, this is not a clone of some old bit of equipment. It's one of their own designs. It's been around for ages. I don't know how much they've tweaked it over the years. And it's like an all-in-one mastering processor. It's bloody amazing, this thing. You can use it on individual tracks, any kind of track, or you can use it on the final output. Now, look, I have put this over the final output, and it is making the mix, giving the mix a lot more balls. A hell of a lot more balls, right? Even though I'm not really doing much, I'm giving it a little bit of push. It's a tiny smidge of focus. This is like upper end, mids, bass, body, right? Bass punch. This is, and these transits, analog bass punch, they're emphasizing how the compressor is side chaining the sound, what it's compressing. Bass punch is going to be, compressing the bass, tightening the bass more. Transients, it's going to be tightening the upper mids and the higher end stuff more, and a little tiny bit of width. But look, here's the thing, I've got this on and it sounds a lot less ball busting without it. If I take this out, let's go back to the start. Look, okay, I just put that on because once I got all the donkey work of the mix done, sorting out what was what track, chopping stuff out, getting rid of stuff I didn't want to, just blah blah blah, all that donkey work stuff. When I started getting into sculpting the sound of it, what I wanted to hear, what I like to hear when I'm mixing, is I like to hear it, how it's going to sound if I go to a club, and it's the same for rock tracks, right? Because when you go to a club and it's being played through the sound system, or you're playing it on a high, your stereo, but really cranked up, or on headphones really cranked up, you get the crank, right? And I like to hear that crank to get me that vibe of it when I'm mixing, because I want to hear what I'm mixing it to, how it's going to sound when it's coming out of a sound system or coming out of somebody's stereo, balls to the wall. Okay. Now, at the point if I decide to work further on this and I bounce down a copy of a mix, I'll turn this off. Then I'll have that cleaner, less balls to the wall version. I'll then put that into mastering software and I'll apply any extra balls to the wall stuff and anything else I decide in the mastering software. Okay? This is just to give me a vibe while I'm building, right? That's all it is, right? But that's just how I like to work. Everyone works different. That's how I like to work. It's the same if I'm doing dance music. I don't want it too clean. I want to hear it with a bit of crank on it, like it's coming out of a sound system. Okay. Now after it comes out of that, because I do like to mix a bit hot, I'll be honest, right? It's going into this stealth limiter from IK Multimedia. I love this limiter. And it's just, it's just making, just trapping it below 0, -3. That's it. So if I decide to go further and work on this mix further, and that would just be adjusting the level of the kick, the snare, and the guitars, and maybe adjusting the amount of treble content on the guitars. I might soften the guitars down. If I do that, I'd run it off without this on. And then I'll put the final mix into the mastering software, where then I can start to sort of think about, extra compression and boosting the bottom end or whatever it is I want to do. Okay? But as I said, this is just on so I get some balls to the wall while I'm listening, because that's how I like to work. Alright? Anyway, like I said, there it is. It's metal, I suppose. Bit different, no vocal or anything. But the channel here is about general stuff to do with music technology, mixing, engineering, all that kind of stuff. I've given up on going for one specific genre now. I wanted to, more people, because you want to make things as useful as possible to more people. So if you just focus on one genre, then you're not providing anything to other people, are you? So there's a bit of metal. That's how I've mixed it. Etc. So there you go. I hope that's useful. Any questions, any comments, leave them in the comments below. As usual, please subscribe. That'd be good. If you put notifications on, you get a notification obviously for new videos. And just as important, please pass the word around. Any forums, any social media you use, you know, that'd be really cool. Alright guys, there you go. Something a bit different. I don't do metal very often, but there you go. Hope that's useful. See you for the next one.